Okay, good evening, everyone. For those of us, there's just a few of us here in the temple right now, but I know there are some of you joining online, so welcome to everybody. Let me just put this mic back in my pocket. All right. So tonight we are starting a 3-week adventure on the life of the saints. We call this the saints, those who walked with God. And every November we spend time with the saints. At least it's a tradition at Ananda Palo Alto to do this, because in this season of gratitude, I was just speaking with friends the other day, and for those of you that were here for our Sunday service, purification on this past Sunday, Kashama was speaking about purification, and she was sharing the story of Diwali, which always begins in late October, early November, which is, of course, tonight you can see I have Hanuman behind me because we're going to be speaking about the saint Neem Karoli Baba, who I'll introduce you to in a few moments, but he was a devotee of Hanuman. And of course, Hanuman is a devotee of Ram, and Diwali is the celebration of the return of Ram to the kingdom, symbolic of the return of light into our own inner kingdom, the return of that divine light into the very essence of our soul's nature, and that reminder and that remembrance that we are, in essence, pure manifestations of divinity. And it's always felt to me that Diwali is the beginning of the season of light. In both the Eastern and Western traditions, we begin with Diwali, and then, as Kashama was explaining this Sunday, in our purification ceremony, she was talking about the symbolism of the jack-o'-lantern, which I'd never really thought about before, but she was saying, we carve out all of the muck from the inside of the pumpkin, so we're cleansing from the inside out, and then we put that light right in the center of the jack-o'-lantern, and it emanates outwardly, and just using that as a symbol of light. And of course, we have Hanukkah and the Christmas season, and all of these different representations. I always find it so beautiful that just as the weather changes and the days grow shorter and we have longer nights and more darkness, we're actually celebrating the return of light, and it's such a beautiful symbol. And I get to go home at night. I like the long days, but I love when we have a nice long night, because you can light your candles and spend more time really celebrating and honoring that inner divine light that's within us. And the saints are a beautiful representation of that. So to come all the way back full circle to what I was saying, this is the reason that we often in October or November have a series on the saints. It's a beautiful time to meditate on the lives of these great beings who have dedicated their entire soul, everything that they are, into the search for the divine. And in a season of gratitude, when we too are offering ourselves back into that light, it's a beautiful reminder. Yogananda told us to meditate on the lives of great saints. And Sister Gyanamata spoke about it often in her own life, in the letters that she would write to others. Read the lives of the great saints, return to their lives over and over again. And when we spend time with them, we really can begin to see why. I've had the great pleasure this past 2 weeks of reading all of these books on Neem Karoli Baba and one book on Hanuman. I can't say I read every word of every book, but I've read most of them. And I can attest to that personally, that it has been such a joy just this past week to immerse myself in the life of somebody who was so highly evolved and so deeply dedicated, and that reminds us of who we truly are. And so this 3-week series, which leads right up to our Thanksgiving break, so we'll have the next 3 weeks just as some logistics. This week we'll talk about Neem Karoli Baba. Next week we'll talk about Ananda Ma, who many of us know. She was a sister saint of Paramahansa Yogananda, and for those of you that read the autobiography of a yogi, you know that he visited her, as well as Swami Kriyananda and many others. Nai Swami Jyotish also had a chance to go and meet her and visit her. So we'll spend some time with her next week, and then in our final week together, Shanti Rubenstone will be here, and she'll lead the last class. We usually do this together, so she gets to be with us for the last class, and she'll speak on the lives of Saint Teresa and Saint John of the Cross, their lives were commingled in a really beautiful way. Saint Teresa was a force of godly power and divinity, and really pushed the boundaries, not only of what it meant to be a woman in that time and pushing the boundaries of her own power, but also of that inner power. And so that will take us up to the Thanksgiving break, and then we'll take a break the night before Thanksgiving, because there's a lot happening in festivities and travels. And then if you'll stick with us when we return for November 30th through December 15th, the next 3 weeks leading up to Christmas, we're going to spend 3 weeks with St. Francis, and we'll talk about the 3 different stages of his life. And there's a lot of music, so we get to share chanting and music, and Shanti and Saganesh and Navashan will be here with that. So we really have a 6-week series on the saints, but we'll focus on St. Francis in the second week there as well. I keep looking back at the camera because we have people joining us online, so I'm speaking to all of us. So before we get too far into Neem Karoli Baba, I wanted to begin tonight with a chant and just a very brief 2 to 3 minute meditation. The chant that we're going to chant tonight is Shri Ram. The words are Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram Om. And this is a beautiful chant again because we are tuning into Neem Karoli Baba, who was a devotee of Hanuman, who I have behind me. I'll tell you a story about this bust of Hanuman in a little bit and where it came from. And so tonight, as we're tuning in and just listening to the words of this chant, let's really channel, whether you know who Neem Karoli Baba is or not, just begin to tune in to and channel the energy of Neem Karoli Baba, a devotee of Hanuman, a devotee of that representation of the purest disciple that we have. So just to say, you're good. Yeah, you can put it anywhere you want. And so to tune into Hanuman, who is the representation of the epitome of what it means to be a disciple. You know, the greatest story of Hanuman is that at one point in his life, he was challenged to open his heart because he was saying he lived only for Ram, and he was challenged to rip open his heart. And he rips open his heart, and the only thing resting in the center of his heart are Ram and Sita. And that's how each one of us can live. And we'll share some more beautiful stories about the life of Hanuman, because you can't talk about Neem Karoli Baba without also talking about Hanuman today. And so as we're tuning in to Shri Ram, Jai Ram, chanting to Ram, to this light, ripping open our hearts so that only God resides there. And then, as I said, we'll meditate for just a moment or two and tune into the stillness. When we invite the saints into the space, they come. So just tune in to Neem Karoli Baba, to Hanuman, and ultimately to that divine light of Ram. Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Let's just meditate for a few moments here, tuning into that call. God's love flows through me. From darkness send out, forever I'm free. Om, peace. Amen. So to begin for just a few moments, because it's our first night really about what we're tuning into when we are tuning into the saints and the lives of the saints. And I was thinking about the paths of yoga, which all of us here in the room, and I'm sure most of us online, have been exposed to. In Raja Yoga, we have these 3 different paths of yoga. I wrote them down because I'm such a visual person that I like to have a visual aid here. So hopefully you guys at home can see this. But we have our 3 different paths of yoga: the path of bhakti, the path of jnana, and the path of karma, which we know bhakti is the path of devotion, karma is the path of action, and jnana is the path of wisdom. And I was thinking about really what that means for us and how this represents the saints. I'm going to put it down just so I don't have to hold it. And, what is the essence of bhakti in action? Because the lives of saints, what they represent for us, the saints are our role models. This is why Yogananda said to us, read the lives of the saints over and over and over again. Come back to them because they represent the essential path that each one of us is taking, which is the path from our human, ego, limited consciousness to triumph over that ego into bliss, into union with the divine. And that's really, as I was contemplating all the lives of the saints and thinking about who I wanted to speak to, I knew immediately that I wanted to speak on Neem Karoli Baba because, and I'll share a little bit more about this in a few moments, when Sai Ganesh and Shanti and I went to India about a month and a half ago now, 2 months ago, the first place that we went after Babaji's cave on our way up to Badrinath was to Kanchi, which is where Neem Karoli Baba's ashram is. And it was sort of just like a spiritual stop along the way. None of us really knew what to expect. We were going because, you're literally driving right past the ashram of a great saint, and why would you pass up the opportunity to do that? And I personally, other than what everyone knows, oh yeah, he was Ram Das's guru and Krishna Das's guru, I really didn't know anything about this great soul. And all of us, for various reasons, and I'll of course share my own personal story, when we went to this ashram had such a deep experience there, and each one of us in a different way. And so I knew immediately that I wanted to speak more about this great saint and to read more about his life. And so immediately I knew I wanted to speak about him tonight, which is why he's first in the lineup. But then, of course, I was spending some time just contemplating the lives of all of the saints and thinking about who we wanted to speak to over the next few weeks. And what I realized as I was looking at all of the lives of the Christian saints and the Indian saints and so on and so forth is that really what we're seeing in each one of them, it's not only the model of how they lived their life, but what we can tune into is the moment of triumph for each one of them. Each one of these saints, whether they were liberated at the end of that lifetime or not, is exposing us to moments of triumph over and over and over again. I think about the life of Frank Laubach, who wrote Letters of a Modern Mystic, who went to the Middle East in order to work as a missionary and convert people to Christianity. And when he got there and tuned into the essence of it and started practicing the presence of God, he realized that conversion wasn't necessary because God was one. And if you're living in a state of divine bliss, then you're sharing that outwardly. And what a moment of triumph. That's why we read these lives over and over again. And so many of the stories of the saints are dramatic. And that's just like the life of Jesus Christ is so dramatic because that triumph is so dramatic within each one of us. The moment that we slay the ego, I remember, and I won't speak too much on Saint Teresa because obviously Shanti will be here at the end of our class to speak on her. The end of our course to speak on her. But I remember when we were on pilgrimage in Italy and we walked into, I forget what the church is now, but there's a church with an enormous marble statue of Saint Teresa. And the moment when she was praying to God and God came with a lightning bolt and struck it, it was a spear, and struck the spear through her heart. And she talks about that moment of divine ecstasy and divine pain all at the same time, because the loss of the ego, the pain that's present with that, and also the bliss. And Swami Kriyananda talks about this, that as we reach that moment of moksha, there's an instantaneous moment of pain and then a release into that eternal bliss, because the triumph over the ego is such a powerful moment for us to each look at and to meditate on. And these are examples of souls who have walked this path and given their lives to the divine. And when I come back to these three different paths, bhakti, jnana, and karma, I was thinking about what that means for each one of us in action. And of course, the state of bhakti in action is the actual state of devotion, practicing devotion, offering our heart to God. And when I was thinking about karma, karma we often translate as action. And to us, that usually means seva. Let's go out and let's act and let's move in the world and serve with God and hopefully get to a point of nishkam karma, where we're serving for the sake of allowing God to flow through us, and that we're moving to that point of not actually expecting or wanting anything back for the fruits of our labors, but giving for the act of giving and for the divine union. But as I was thinking about karma, yoga, and action, it also translates to our willpower, that the desire to act actually needs to be initiated with a burst of willpower and a willingness to set aside all else and live for God alone. Last night we were with a few groups of people who are taking different courses and trainings, and it was our last week together, and we watched the film The Answer. And for those of you that haven't seen it, it's the life of Swami Kriyananda. And there's a moment when he's speaking, when Master is speaking, Yogananda is speaking to Swami Kriyananda, and he says, live for God alone. There's nothing else there. And we say that over and over again, and we think that, but the saints are examples of lives that have actually offered that moment of willpower. That desire is merged with the action to live for God alone. And this is also the essence, of what Kriya Yoga is. The root of Kriya is karma, is action. And again, it's not just an activity on the outward sense, but it's the action of will, the willingness to give ourselves into that Kriya breath, into that meditation, into that activity that we're doing. And the saints represent that for us powerfully in our lives, which then brings us full circle to jnana, which in my mind, and jnana's the hardest one for me to grasp anyway. I'm not an intellectual, I'm a total bhakti, but in thinking about and contemplating jnana and this idea of, neti, not this, not that, not this, not that, contemplating the wisdom. And what we actually get to at the very root, what the jnana yogis show us, is that when we finally distill down to the essence of what that intellectual knowing, of what the wisdom of knowing God truly is, it's a surrender of the ego. That what we really come to realize when we ask the essential question, what is? God is the only reality. And so we have these three aspects: devotion, willingness, and surrender. And that, in essence, and you have right in the center of that, is God in the soul. And when we can live our lives in this way, and when we can look at the models of great saints who have done this for us, what we see is that that's the pathway that leads us to God. It doesn't matter what religion, what path we're taking, that it's these three activities can be used to distill down to: is my willingness present? Is my devotion present, and is my ability to surrender present? And that those three bring us right into the very center of that triangle of what it means in the path of Raja Yoga to transcend the ego and to live for God alone. And so, to begin with that, as we're saying, I just wanted to do a little bit of background on the lives of the saints and what they can represent for us. And each saint speaks for themselves, so there's really little introduction that's needed. But I wanted to begin a bit with the life of Neem Karoli Baba. And so let me just ask, how many of you are familiar with Neem Karoli Baba? Okay, not very much, a little bit. And have you guys seen pictures of him? I didn't put the screen up. I wish I had now because, so just to begin, so Neem Karoli Baba, I wasn't, as I said, that familiar with him before going to India a few weeks ago, or a few months ago now, but he's a character, he was just, he lived such an interesting life. And to begin, if you look at images of him, and I wish I can put them on my phone for those of us that are here in the room, and I don't know how well it'll come out on the camera there, but Neem Karoli Baba, in all of these pictures, so let me just begin by saying that many of his devotees believe, and it's been written in several places, that Neem Karoli Baba was actually an incarnation of Hanuman. And so to hold that reality that what we are talking about is an extremely highly evolved soul, and we're going to pick it up from that standpoint. I was reading this sweet book by one of his disciples. It's called It All Abides in Love. And in this book, he was talking a bit about that reality of Neem Karoli Baba being an incarnation of Hanuman. And you can see that's what I wanted to show you in these pictures. He looks like a monkey, and I don't mean physically, but in the way that he sits, in the way that he, like here, you can kind of just pass it around a little bit. Like I said, I wish I'd put it up. And those of you that are at home, you're on your computer, so you can Google it. Google Neem Karoli Baba and do an image search. But you guys can just see he was often wrapped in this plaid blanket. And so many of his pictures, his hands are just contorted in these interesting poses, sitting on his forehead, or he's often holding his foot. I couldn't even do it. He's laying down and his foot is being held right up here. He's just contorted his body into these images that are very monkey-like in the way that he's sitting. And so just, again, all of this expressing, it was the first thing I noticed because we entered into the ashram and Sai Ganesh was telling us just right outside that many people believed him to be an incarnation of Hanuman. And it was immediately the first thing that I noticed was the way that he looked in all of these images and sort of that monkey-like presence that he had in the way he was sitting. And in this book, he goes on to say that Neem Karoli Baba loved to climb trees, and so he would often climb up into the trees, and his devotees would just find him sitting in a tree and hanging out of trees. There's actually in the city of Kanchi, or the village right out of it, that there's a special tree that he would always go and sit in and climb in, and his devotees still, they've preserved it and they go there. And so can you imagine you just wake up one morning and you find your guru just sitting in the trees? And he even said in this book that often devotees would find that Neem Karoli Baba's hands would turn red, and the palms of his feet and hands would turn red, just like a monkey. And so we have all of these aspects here. You can see these echoes of Hanuman coming through. And I was going to save this for the end when we'll talk a bit more about Hanuman, because we'll end by listening to, for anyone who wants to stay, the Hanuman Chalisa, which he repeated every day and advocated, of course, that his devotees would repeat as well. And so we'll listen to that for any of you who want to stay and listen to it. But I was also reading this other little book, not little book, this is a great book. This is by the Saint Vanamali. And for anyone who was born and raised in the West and, I'm caught. For anyone who was born and raised in the West and didn't grow up with the stories of Hindu gods and goddesses, I highly recommend Vanamali's books. I've read her book on Krishna. I have her book on Shiva, which I haven't started yet, and I've been reading her book on Hanuman because she speaks in a way of not just telling you the stories, but she also really talks about the symbolism and the essences there. And it's just a nice way to kind of get into some of the other, that's my plug for her book. I am Amazoning her. Yeah, I bought these on Amazon.
She was, because I went to the ashram and bought books from her, but I didn't know you could buy them.
Yeah, I bought this one and Shiva and the Krishna book all on Amazon. So yeah, so you can all have access. It's just a click away. But this is a very sweet book. I'm only partially through it, but I was just reading it today a little bit more. And one of the things that, Yeah, she lives in Rishikesh. Yeah. But one of the things that she speaks about here is that the origin of Hanuman, and how Hanuman doesn't really have an origin in the Ramayana, but that his birth is, he actually comes from, I forget what they're called, I'm going to forget all of these words, but forgive me, and the essence of the stories are still there, but that, he's born and descended from the species of monkeys that exist there, and that, of course, he was born from the gods, the wind god, and kind of was created through that, but that he doesn't really have an origin story. We don't actually find out really where he comes from. She sort of says, in my own words, he just kind of shows up on the scene in the Ramayana, and there's not much about him that comes before that. I keep thinking about origin stories because, superheroes, now that's the big thing in film industry. We're giving all of our superheroes and villains these origin stories, and Hanuman doesn't really have an origin story, and that's very similar to Neem Karoli Baba. I've been looking up Neem Karoli Baba's birth, and you can't actually find that much about him. He was born sometime in the early 1900s, and we know who his parents were and what name he was born as. But there's not a lot of facts about his life. There's a lot of mystery that's cloaked in this man named Karoli Baba. He was always just behind the veil of a human existence in that sense, I would say. What I mean by that is he just always was kind of tucked back a little bit more. Like I said, he's always wrapped in this plaid cloaked blanket, and I just think about that, this idea that he's just sort of behind the veil because his consciousness was always in the divine. And if he is in fact an incarnation of Hanuman, of course that would make sense for us, that Hanuman, in the end of his story, is triumph, that complete triumph, and then to return in that incarnation of knowing that he is one with the divine. And I wanted to begin by reading, this comes out of a second book. I'll share all these books with you just in case anybody wants to read them. This is a very famous book. It's called Miracles of Love. It's stories that are collected from the life of his devotees, and it was compiled by Ram Dass. And so this is a very famous book about him. And I wanted to read one of the stories that one of his devotees, her name is Anjali, and what she says about Neem Karoli Baba, because it's a perfect introduction to him. There can be no biography of him. Facts are few, stories many. He seems to have been known by different names in many parts of India, appearing and disappearing through the years. His non-Indian devotees knew him as Neem Karoli Baba, but mostly he was called Maharajji. Just as he said, he was nobody. He gave no discourses. The briefest, simplest stories were his teachings. Usually he sat or lay on a wooden bench wrapped in a plaid blanket while a few devotees sat around him. Visitors came and went. They were given food, a few words, a nod, a pat on the head or on the back, and then they were sent away. There was gossip and laughter, for he loved to joke. Orders for running the ashram were given, usually in a piercing yell across the compound. Sometimes he sat in silence, absorbed in another world to which we could not follow. But bliss and peace poured down on us. Who he was no more than the experience of him, the nectar of his presence, and the totality of his absence, enveloping us now, just like his plaid blanket. Which is just such a sweet way to look at him, but you can see it's cloaked in this mystery. I love that reality. The facts were few, but the stories were many, and that's what you see. He has no writings. He doesn't have any teachings. He really was just this character of a presence, and I love that line that she writes in here where she says he would just sort of yell orders around, across the compounds to keep things running, but mostly his presence was what people felt and what people experienced in him. He was an essential bhakti in that sense, and that's what you get. That's the feeling you have when you're immersed in any of these stories of him. One night earlier this week, Shanti came over late one evening to pick something up for me, and she said, "What are you doing?" And I was reading the third of the books that I'm going to show you. This one is my favorite one that I've been reading. It's called Whispers in the Heart, and this book, I'll come back to, I know where I was with that story, but just to share. This book, there are 2 books written by this author, and I'll drop them all into the comments later on live stream for those of you that can't see them that well. And One book he's compiled that I haven't read yet is about stories of the lives of devotees when he was alive, when Neem Karoli Baba was alive. But this book is actually a compilation of stories after Neem Karoli Baba left his body. And so it's so wonderful. It's the stories of devotees who have been touched by him, sometimes in a physical form, coming to visit them, sometimes through a picture or through a song. There's so many beautiful stories about the first time somebody saw a picture of Neem Karoli Baba and how their heart just burst open, or they heard Krishna Das singing a song and it awakened something in them. And I'll share a few stories from here. But what you can feel more than anything, sorry, I keep tugging on this. Let me just wrap it that way. What you feel in him more than anything is the pure essence of his love and that connection with the divine, which is so essentially grounded in joy. Everything that you see and everything that you read and you feel in these stories of him is just the essence of joy. And so to come back to where I was saying, I was reading this book the other night when Shanti came over to pick something up from me, and she said, "What are you doing?" And I was just sitting down on my couch just crying, in the most beautiful way, because these stories were so deep and they were so touching, and that the very essence of that's why I loved what this devotee Anjali was saying, that to know him was simply to be in his presence and to feel him. And there aren't, the triumphant stories of, that we hear from St. Francis and St. Teresa. I always think about that. So that tells us something about the Christian church and the Catholic church, that the Christian saints, they had to fight and warrior and martyr themselves in order to find God. And we see that in the stories, and there's beautiful things that we can take away from those stories, but also just to be here, to be wrapped and cloaked in love. And that's what I feel every time you see these images where he's wearing this blanket and he's wrapped in this blanket, and in these contortions of monkey-like positions with that blanket wrapped around him. I just feel like that blanket is representative of Divine Mother, and he's just constantly cloaked in that love, and he's sharing the essence of that love with others. And so with that, I'll share just a few stories about his life that come from the book. And then also ask questions, share your own stories. Anyone who's online, we don't have anyone in the back manning it, so we can't hear your comments, but I have my phone, so you can text me if you have anything that you want to share. We'll just share a few stories and then talk a bit about Hanuman and have an informal night as we go through this. And so I wrote out a list of stories that I wanted to make sure that we share. I wanted to start just by talking a bit about his playfulness. And these stories, they all come from Whispers in the Heart. And of course, many of them begin with a moment of crisis for somebody. And so there was a story of a woman who was going through a divorce, and her entire life was just being torn apart. And she was, I think, losing her children in a custody battle and just feeling a lot of angst and pain. And she was invited. She was a Hatha yogi practitioner. And so she was invited to a retreat where Krishna Das was playing. I believe it was a kirtan retreat. And so she spent the evening in kirtan and was listening to Krishna Das singing all of this beautiful music. And she goes outside at one moment. She steps up and she moves outside, and she's just outside in whatever the meadow or the grasses. I think they were somewhere on the coast, and just looking out at the water and looking out at the nature. And she suddenly hears the word laugh. And she just keeps hearing the word laugh. And then suddenly Neem Karoli Baba appears in front of her, and he just looks at her and he just says, laugh. And he just starts laughing and laughing to the point that she's laughing along with him because there's nothing else to do. And the essence of that story, you think, is the beginning of just finding joy. But then, why wouldn't we laugh through every moment? But then later, she goes on to say that the next day she was looking at a poster in her Hatha yoga studio, and there was a new class that was starting called Laughter Yoga. And so she went and took Laughter Yoga and fell in love with it, and then took a training in it and became the practitioner and the instructor of this herself. And now she talks about how Laughter Yoga is the very essence of her life. And so he was guiding her and leading her. But again, the stories, another one that I'll share, which goes along with this, is this woman was not in crisis. She and her husband were devotees for a very long time. Her husband spent a lot of time with Neem Karoli Baba, and she came onto the scene a little bit later, but had met him a few times, and they were sitting on the beach together, and she was just missing him and praying to him and saying that she wanted to be with him. And she looks out at the horizon. They're watching the sunset, sunset, and she was a Colombian woman, and she was a dancer. And so she describes this story, how she's looking out at the horizon, and there's an odd, strange little like dark mass that's just out at the horizon as she's looking out on the water. And it's getting closer to her, and she's just watching it, and her husband is sitting next to her, just, not able to see it, but just looking out and enjoying the beauty that's all around. And she starts to describe what she's seeing to her husband, who of course is a devotee of Neem Karoli Baba as well. And it gets closer, and she realizes that it's Neem Karoli Baba walking off the horizon, but he's doing something strange. And as he gets closer, she realizes that he's practicing this authentic or traditional Colombian dance, and whatever it is, the way that she describes it, he has his blanket wrapped around him, and he's using it sort of like a flamingo dancer would use their skirt, and he's just doing all of these moves. And she said he's playing the role of the male and the female in the parts, and doing all of the bashful pieces, and just using this beautiful, or this plaid cloak that he has to just dance and dance. And he comes up and just dances all around her until she's dancing with him, and then just tells her, "I love you," or something along those lines, something precious like that, and then dances back off into the horizon. And these stories, it's such an incredible thing to hear, laugh, dance, and not only incredible in the sense that here is this great soul who's coming and visiting his disciples and his devotees along the way, but it distills down to the essence of what he brought in that bhakti spirit, and that at the root of that devotion is joy. And he was bringing so much joy and so much playfulness. I believe he must have been a diabetic, because he died of a diabetic coma. And at one story I was reading, it said that he couldn't eat sugar. So I'm putting all of those pieces together. Of course, if he's a self-realized soul or an incarnation of a highly evolved soul, he's playing the role of a diabetic in this life. But for whatever reason, he wasn't eating sugar. And so a devotee comes up and he gives him a piece of prasad. And Neem Karoli Baba accepts the prasad and says, thank you, thank you. And he doesn't eat it, and he just is holding it. And the devotee says, it's prasad, you must eat it. So he takes it in his palm and goes like this and pretends to eat it. But as one of the other devotees sees it, and of course calls him out and says, you didn't eat it. And he takes it, and it's sitting in his palm, and it disappears from his palm and ends up in this palm, and then it pops up in his, in the folds of his blanket, and it's just playing around. And he's just watching this little, sugar ball of prasad just dancing around, and all of the devotees are seeing it, and he's just playing with them in that sleight of hand, and he's just saying, you see, I can manifest or take away anything in creation with just a moment's notice. Just again, this idea, I don't have to eat this prasad, I am prasad, I am that realization of the divine, but with such playfulness. It reminded me of the story of Master. Again, we just watched it in The Answer yesterday, so it was fresh in my mind, but there's the story of Yogananda where he goes to a little store and he collects all of these things, and then he comes home and he's with Swami Kriyananda and a few other disciples. And he says, come here. And he's got this little paper bag full of things. And he goes in and he opens it up. And the first one is a squirt gun. And he's just squirting everybody with a squirt gun. And then there was one of those little toy soldiers that, you shoot up in a parachute and comes back down. And he was just playing little practical jokes and toys and using all of these things to express that lightheartedness. In the film yesterday, at the end of that, he's teaching at the end of that scene, Yogananda's teaching Swami Kriyananda a lesson, and saying, you're too serious, laugh, enjoy life, be lighter. And he says, suffer the little children to come on to us, or to come on to me. And just this idea of a lightheartedness and a playfulness. And I think that that's one of the essential pieces that you see in the life of Neem Karoli Baba. And it's certainly, it's the experience that I had when I walked into this ashram. Again, here it was, and you're just set in the hills. You can Google an image of Kanchi when you go home, Kainchi. This is his ashram in the Himalayan foothills. And just tucked away amidst this beautiful, lush green forest is this bright orange temple. And I was reading a story in one of the books, I can't remember which one now, he was working with one of his disciples, and he said to his disciple, I believe it was Kanchi, though it doesn't say what ashram. He said to his disciple, he gave him a task, and he said, paint the ashram. And he was trying to get his disciple to be more in tune with him. And so the disciple goes and he picks out the color blue, and he paints the whole ashram blue. And then he comes back and he says, no, it's not the right color, leaves again. And then the disciple chooses a different color. I think he chose purple the next time, and he comes back and he says, no. And then he comes back 3 or 4 times until finally he painted it what is now this yellow-orange color that you can see if you look at images of it. And he said, now you see, now you have it. Just helping his disciple to tune into him in that way and to tune into that expression of Divine Mother. But when I walked into the grounds of Kanchi and was just here, and you can walk around, and for me it was actually, I think, legitimately the first Hindu ashram temple that I had stepped into, because we didn't go to any in Delhi the night before. And so at first I was just a little overwhelmed with the culture shock of how different it is, as I said, and shared stories about, they're ringing bells everywhere you go. It's loud, it's chaotic. It's very different than Ananda, where we come in and we're very withdrawn, and I shouldn't say withdrawn, but we're pulling our energy in. We're very reserved and quiet. And that is the expression of just of worship that I've been used to here at Ananda. And it's just the exact opposite there, which makes the perfect sense, because here we are laughing, dancing, crying out for joy. Why wouldn't we ring a bell when we walk in? Why wouldn't you wake God up? There's one more story that I had on this list. There was one man, again, this came from Whispers in the Heart, who was lamenting, which I'm sure we can all understand to some extent, that he had found Neem Karoli Baba and discovered that Neem Karoli Baba was his teacher after Neem Karoli Baba had left his body. And so he was up one night just lamenting that he was never going to get to spend time with his teacher in the body. And in the middle of the night, there's the time, he said it was 3:20, and he knows this because later he sees that it's 3:22. He hears this, wake up. Wake up, wake up. And so he opens his eyes, and there's Neem Karoli Baba standing over his bed saying, wake up, just emanating light. And he thinks he's dreaming. And he looks over at the clock, and Neem Karoli Baba says to him, you see, now it's 3:22. You're not asleep, you're awake. And he says, you wanted to see me, here I am. And he sits on the bed, and they have darshan together for however long, and then he disappears again back into the ether. And it's just such a beautiful expression. Each one of these moments is a call of love, right? It's a call of desire and a yearning to be closer to that divinity, to that expression of the divine. And that Neem Karoli Baba, just like any of the saints, they can't resist that love. That's something that Yogananda says. There are so many saints that he would see in his life, not saints necessarily that he would go and visit, like the stories that we hear in Autobiography of the Yogi, but also saints that would just be present, energies that would just be near him, because he says wherever God is, there the saints want to be. And the saints can't resist that call to help each one of us, because they know that struggle. They know where we are. They're standing where we are, as are the avatars. But the saints are that expression in the human body. They're fighting the battle. And that's what's so powerful about these lives, is that we're watching, like in the moment, we're watching that triumph happen. Over and over again. We're watching at the end of St. Francis's life, which we'll get to in 6 weeks here, that he's calling out, he's in so much pain, and he's just crying out, and he's singing the Canticle of the Creatures, this beautiful poem song that he'd written, that just talks about the glory of God and how majestic and how beautiful and how powerful the rising sun is and how much he loves God. Here he is in severe pain at the end of his life. And his brother, his brother disciple, I was going to say, his disciple, Bernard, is saying, stop singing, you're dying. What are people going to think? And he can't help but express that joy, because in those moments of triumph, that's all there is. And so these people can be telling us these stories about real pain, losing your children in a custody battle. That is a serious pain. And what does Neem Karoli Baba say? Laugh, find your joy, find that place of peace. And these two other stories, they're even sweeter to me. Just somebody missing their teacher, missing their guru, and here he is, and he just shows up. It's one of my favorite stories from the autobiography is the story of Kashi. No, Kashi is the sapphire. Who's the young boy who dies and he comes back to find him? It is Kashi, okay. And, in this story, this young boy who was at the Ranchi school, he dies at Ranchi school. Because Yogananda says to his father, don't take him to Delhi for the vacation break because he'll die there. Let him stay here at Ranchi. And his father takes him away, and he was so sad. And he says to Kashi, Kashi says, will you find me? And Yogananda, as soon as he realizes that soul has reincarnated, he says he uses yogic techniques that he doesn't reveal to us, but he uses yogic techniques to find that soul. And he goes to that home and he welcomes this baby that this family has just had. And he just looks into the eyes and he says, name this child Kashi. And he honors that. And it's just such a simple expression of how powerful the love of God is for each one of us, that anytime we call, even just think about that. I think about that all the time with Babaji. Anytime we call Babaji's name with sincerity, he promises to be there, to show up. And just because we can't see him doesn't mean that he's not right there. And just because we can't feel him, which is probably a more common experience for us, doesn't mean that he's not there, that they'll always show up for us. And that's what so many of these stories represent. And they're also stories of power, but we won't go on. I mean, I could tell stories all night long, but also just so many stories of his power. He was raising people from the dead. There was a story about a woman, and she was an artist, and she came with her husband. So she wasn't even really interested in meeting Neem Karoli Baba. She wasn't a devotee, but she was just sketching him while her husband was talking to him. And then later that night, she became severely ill, and they were supposed to leave for Delhi the next day. But the doctor came and said, there's no way, and this is back prior to 1974, so different even than it is now to be sick in the foothills of the Himalayan mountains. And the doctor said, there's no way that she can leave. She might not even survive. And Neem Karoli Baba says, no, she's fine. And she takes the picture and she just starts looking at the picture. And as she's taking the picture and walking closer to Neem Karoli Baba, with every step that she's taking, as she gets closer to this saint, she feels more and more well until she's standing right in front of him and she's perfectly well again. And the same thing happens. There's a story of a man with cancer. And he says the same thing, there's no cancer. And then he goes into surgery. All of his body was riddled with this cancer. And then he goes into surgery and they do the surgery and the operation. They don't find a trace of cancer in his body. So these miracles, that's one of the stories, or one of the things that his devotee in It All Abides in Love, he says at the beginning that miracles were just commonplace, that is his legacy. Essentially, those are my words, not his, but his legacy. He wasn't teaching, he wasn't writing, he wasn't lecturing, but his legacy was the miracles that he performed and the representation of, or the essence, the essential vibration of love that he epitomized for each one of us. And, that's just share one final story. I haven't spoken that much about Ram Dass because most of us know, but Ram Dass, he had many famous Western disciples, Ram Dass and Krishna Das probably being two of his most famous, well-known disciples. And there was a story, this was when Ram Dass was still a professor at Harvard and he was lecturing. And Ram Dass had come to India to spend time with Neem Karoli Baba. And in the process of that, there were also some Indian dignitaries and people high up in the Indian Supreme Court who were there. And they had discovered that Ram Dass was present and that he was a revered professor in the United States. And so they asked him if he would come and he would speak. And he didn't want to go, but he didn't want to lie. He just wanted to stay with his guru, but he also didn't want to lie. And so he sort of was like, I don't know. And he's standing in front of his guru, and he says, well, it depends what my guru wants. And Neem Karoli Baba just passes it right back to him, and he says, it depends what Ram Dass wants. And so then Ram Dass goes because he doesn't want to lie, and he's there. And then these people ask him to come back the next day to speak and to lecture. And I guess this was when there was a little political turmoil going on this was during the Nixon administration between the US and China. And so these people were inviting him to come and speak, and they wanted to have a political conversation. And so Ram Dass was feeling more and more caught in this moment. And he says, well, let's ask my guru. And the next day he comes back back, and he's just pleading in his mind with his guru, saying, please don't make me go. I'm here to be with you. I don't want to speak about politics and tense moments and things like that. And his guru, so Neem Karoli Baba says, well, sure, he can speak. And he says, Ram Dass, what would you speak about? And Ram Dass, again, it's a Supreme Court, Ram Dass says, well, I guess I would speak about law. I'd speak about law and dharma and karma. And Neem Karoli Baba goes, oh, yes, that's wonderful. And of course you'll speak about Hanuman. And he says, yes, of course I'll speak about Hanuman. And you'll speak about me? And he says, yes. And you'll speak about God? And he says, yes. And these people start going, no, we want him to speak on politics and this and that. And he's a professor. And Neem Karoli Baba just looks at them and says, oh no, Ram Dass, his words, let me get them. Ram Dass, he can only speak about God. And then these people say, well, never mind, we don't want him. But he talks about that moment. He says, one, it's a beautiful representation of how the guru always shows up, right? Or the teacher always shows up for him. He was playing with him this whole time, but in the end, he ultimately saved him. But he goes on at the end of that story to express that those words really marked and shaped the rest of his life, because here he was a Harvard professor and an intellectual, but that these words, he can only speak about God. And of course, we know the trajectory of Ram Dass's life after that, and everything that he brought back and the teachings that he's shared, and that was such a pivotal moment in his life. And so we see these guiding forces that are happening throughout so many of the stories of Neem Karoli Baba's life. And so before we sort of talk a little bit more about Hanuman, anyone else want to share thoughts, stories, comments, anything?
One, have any of you guys read the book by Larry Brilliant?
It's called
Sometimes Brilliant. He was also a disciple of Neem Karoli Baba. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically, Larry Brilliant was this hippie, and he's kind of lost. He wasn't a very good student, and he didn't know what he wanted to do with his life, but he had some feeling that he wanted to do something good, and he was, meeting with this family friend of his, and the family friend said, you should go to medical school. And he said, I didn't take the MCAT, I didn't really study, I'm not ready to go to medical school. And the doctor said, well, I'm on the admissions committee of medical school. And we just had someone drop out, and school starts soon, so we have someone right here who can administer the MCAT to you. So basically, like that day, he just took the MCAT. Hadn't really studied, so didn't probably do very well, but he was admitted to medical school. And he graduated medical school, and he just roamed around with hippies, going to like all of the festivals, doing drugs, and he had no real direction. He just did a bunch of drugs. He was hooking up with a bunch of people at these festivals. And this girl who he was really in love with said she's going to India. She heard about, this guy named Karoli Baba. So he follows her to India. He has no spiritual inklings. He's barely ever practiced medicine. He occasionally did some gigs to, try and get food on the road, but had really no medical experience. And his wife takes him to Neem Karoli Baba, and she's completely smitten with Neem Karoli Baba. But he's turned off by him, because he's this guy, he won't really acknowledge Larry or talk to him. There's all these people kissing his feet. He thought it was really weird. And so he's devastated, because he's out in the middle of, the Himalayas. And this girl who he loved is not going to go back, he could tell. But he's like, all these followers seem like complete dopes. And this guy barely says anything, and everyone just kisses his feet. And so he just goes, and he just goes away. And he goes to look over this lake. So he found this lake a few miles away, and he just sat at the lake. And at the lake, he has this incredible spiritual experience where he sees God at the lake. And it was just like this overwhelming experience of like seeing this new kind of part of reality. And he doesn't really understand it. And he goes back to see his girlfriend and see Neem Karoli Baba. And Neem Karoli Baba says, "Where have you been?" And he says, "You know, I just needed some time away." He said, "Were you at the lake?" And then he says, "Yeah, how did you know that?" He said, "Did you see God at the lake?" And he realized that Neem Karoli Baba created this experience for him and drew him in. And he spends this time with Neem Karoli Baba. And at one point, Neem Karoli Baba says, "Larry, smallpox is going to be pulled up by the roots. It's going to be eradicated in India." And at the time, smallpox was this massive disease. It was devastating India and almost the entire developing world. And it was considered impossible to stop. There was a vaccine, but to get 1 billion people in India who didn't even have electricity, didn't have education, actually believed that smallpox, that the vaccine was evil, to get that vaccine was considered impossible. So he said, "You're going to cure smallpox in India." Neem Karoli Baba tells us Larry Brilliant. And Larry Brilliant had never seen a smallpox case in his life, didn't know anything about smallpox, was also on a tourist visa in India, so couldn't work anywhere in India. And so he tells all this to us. He says, "Well, I don't think I hope it gets better, but I don't have any expertise. I've never done any work in public health. I've never seen a single case. I don't know anything about smallpox, and I can't work in India." And Neem Karoli Baba says, "Go and meet with the UN and ask them if they'll give you a job." And so he goes there, and he meets with the UN. He just kind of shows up, and he's this hippie from America, and he tries to get an appointment. And for all the reasons he talked about, they get rejected. So Neem Karoli Baba keeps on telling him, keep going back, right? And then one day, Neem Karoli Baba is meditating, and Larry Brilliant's been rejected about 15 times. These people are like, "Why do you keep going to the office? Like, you have no work authorization." The smallpox team had been completely dismantled because the Indian government decided it was impossible to eradicate smallpox. So there was no funding for any hires of any kind, even if he was qualified, even if he was a doctor who had expertise. And Neem Karoli Baba just stands up straight and he says, "Now!" And then he said, "Go right now." And so he goes to the UN office, and it had just come to pass that there had been some special budgetary allotment for one non-medical hire, like a secretary, to work on smallpox eradication. And he was offered this job. And so he started as this secretary, and over time, he became the head of the UN effort to eradicate India in smallpox, and they successfully eradicated it down from millions of people, mostly children, dying of smallpox every single year, to 0 cases, not just in India, but in 27 other countries that were, had massive smallpox cases. And there were these series of sort of miraculous events that allowed him to eradicate it, and they go through kind of some of what they were. But in the end, he became the guy who was able to get rid of this deadly disease and save millions and millions of lives. And he became one of the most famous doctors in the world, one of the most successful public health victories ever.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the stories I'm reminded of, I forget where we read this, somewhere in our teachings on this path. Somebody makes a comment about these great saints and these great avatars, and they say they make a mockery of the material plane. Everything that we think, that we can think is everything we think that's limiting us, they just make a mockery of it. And that's a beautiful example of that. Just pushing through all of these boundaries, becoming a doctor and just, here's the MCATs, take it, here, go now. And they're also pushing us. They're always pushing us to our own highest potential. We just sit so idly and wait for something great to happen. And I just love that. Now, go. What are you doing? Just, same thing like here, wake up. You said you wanted to be with me, and here I am sitting on your bed. Wake up. And it's such a perfect symbolic phrase because, of course, Yogananda uses the term awaken. Awaken to who you truly are. Yeah, it's a beautiful. I remember hearing that story recently. And I'd forgotten about it. That's a really powerful story.
And it's a lot of for us about listening.
Yeah.
And just trusting.
Yeah.
And starting with really small things.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can feel it in your own life if you really know. I guess the word is noticing. Start to notice.
Yeah, noticing.
Little tiny things that happen to you that just are unusual.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what Thich Nhat Hanh says, that, miracles are commonplace. If they're not occurring, something's gone wrong because God is always present.
All the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not to that huge demonstration of a reality, but just yesterday, what day is this, Wednesday? Yes, yesterday. Yesterday morning was so long ago. Small thing. I'm leading meditation, right, in the morning, and I read Whispers first, and Biraj is chanting. And I'm thinking, when I'm selecting which one I'm going to read the night before, wouldn't it be nice if the last chant he does matches what I'm going to say? Mm-hmm. And I thought, I'll select one, but I don't have time to call Biraj. It was late and whatever. So I just showed up and he's chanting and whatever. And I actually even selected another Whispers, but guess what the last chant was? It was, the bee of my mind, and so I quickly flipped to the one, and that was the one I had opened to the night before. Yeah. And it was just, it's so, that's a little thing, a little nothing thing, but it had to be directed by, Spirit, God. Just a silly little thing like that, and I know that happens to us all the time.
Yeah.
Little things.
Yeah. I think
where God just wants us to be happy.
Yeah.
To feel joy or to experience love.
Yeah.
Whatever. So it might not be in this gigantic way.
Yeah. It's true.
But that was, little things like that happen all the time.
Absolutely.
Don't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
You just have to, and so I was like saying, thank you, because it was a lovely experience.
Yeah.
So to be grateful.
Yeah.
I guess then.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, noticing and being grateful, because that's the thing. We're so lucky that we would look at that just sending a prayer to God and Divine Mother and saying, I'd love it if the poem and the reading matches with the song, and knowing that and feeling that and even being guided to that the night before with your intuition. 99% of the world would never, it's coincidence, it doesn't matter. They miss the miracles, right? That's the essence of what Thich Nhat Hanh is saying. That's a miracle because God is speaking to you. And I loved what you were just saying, that our job is to notice and to feel that love is always beaming down on us. And that's what he was representing in each one of these. Even that word laugh. And then the next day, she sees a pamphlet for laughing yoga, and just, I can laugh my way through all of this pain. Or to just send up a prayer call. Let me feel you. Let me know that you're present here. Open to engrossed is the bee of my mind, or whatever the poem version of that is. Yeah, and if we miss it, then we forget. And that's the essence of it, like we were talking about here with these three ideas of our willpower, our surrender, and our devotion. the saints, the lives of the saints, in a way, it's almost unfair because they are so grandiose. I mean, that story, and this is why Larry Brilliant gets to write a book, because something brilliant has happened. But we also get to sit in this room and have this satsang and share these stories. And I'm sure if we went through this, just reflecting on the week, when have you felt God present with you this week? When has God spoken to you? When has, the teacher wrapped you in his blanket and done a dance for you just to make you smile? It happens to us all the time, whether it's just watching a rose blossom or, I found myself, when doing a lot of, just kind of walking around the neighborhood, just being grateful every time I would actually notice a beautiful flower, because how many millions of times have we passed a flower and never looked at it? And that's just God beaming on us. And I think that's exactly right. And that's what these saints, that's what they represent for us. And the triumph is dramatic, which is why we get to see that in their lives. And that's why we get to tell and hear their stories, and they share their stories with us because they are dramatic. But that's where we are coming kind of full circle. Anytime we triumph over the ego, it's dramatic. Every time we choose to look upward and to raise our energy upward, it's a dramatic and triumph for us, and we get to hold on to that. And that's what Yogananda tells us, is that at the end of our lives, at the end of all of our incarnations, everything gets washed away except those moments where you touched into the divine. That the timeline of your soul is actually just every single one of those moments where you touched in with the divine. Everything else doesn't matter. It's just the garb that you're putting on. I get to be Lakshmi this time and deal with my struggles and my karmas and the things I'm frustrated with and challenged with, because there are lessons for me to learn with them. And each of you gets to put on the garb of James and Michael and Atmajoti and Jing. And next time they go away, because this doesn't matter. It's those other moments that matter, and that's what the lives of the saints are. They're living embodiments of that. That's what Anjali was saying to us at the very beginning. Who he was, what he brought, his legacy was the very essence of him and the totality of his absence. And we can translate to that to God, that the very essence of life is the presence of God and the totality of his absence, which that absence is just us, because he's never actually absent from us, and it's just such a beautiful thing.
One thing I found interesting about the Larry Brilliant story was, so there's this idea that our whole personality and our characteristics, it's kind of washed away. It's not important, right? But actually, for Larry Brilliant, he had these attributes throughout his life, which were very consistent, where he hated rules, he was rebellious, he liked kind of pushing the envelope, sort of chaos. He was extremely idealistic. He hated power figures and authority. He wasn't really someone who could sit still. He was very restless, always trying to change. He was charismatic. Someone who was very visionary, very clever. And those things were used early in his life to have really fun parties and to do a ton of drugs and to be a big player in the hippie scene. And it was actually a big disappointment to his parents and his family. They felt like you had all this promise, but you could never fit in. Even you somehow got into medical school and you just keep on messing up. You can't do it. And even when he tried to be a devotee under Neem Karoli Baba, he wasn't a really good devotee because he couldn't sit and meditate for very long. He wasn't naturally he wanted to do things, and he had this kind of restlessness. And what Neem Karoli Baba did was say, I see that it's not for you to sit with me and meditate. You're restless, you're idealistic, you have kind of this grand vision for healing the world, and you won't accept anyone who says you can't. And I can see that you can use that to touch God and to touch other people. Just the same way he saw that Ram Dass was a great speaker and lecturer, and that was his path, to be someone who speaks. He saw that Larry Brilliant was someone who could do. And when they were fighting smallpox, Larry Brilliant was constantly stymied. There was impossible barriers, bureaucratic barriers. It was the most logistically challenging problem you could ever imagine. No one would report any smallpox cases. And he constantly had little cheats which were against the rules and against propriety and against anyone who was trained in public health, anyone who was a real doctor would have never done these things. For example, he paid kids to tell them when there was a smallpox case. And it became more common in India to know how much money you could get for reporting a smallpox case. More people knew that than knew who the Prime Minister of India was. Because it was so successful, and before they had no idea where even the cases were, there was no way to contain it. And by doing this thing which is taboo in public health circles, paying desperate poor kids to report their peers, that was the way he solved smallpox, and he kept on breaking the rules in that way. And so he had this character throughout, and if you just sort of tweaked the direction of those traits, it could go from being something which is kind of self-destructive, actually, or at least not productive, and not really getting him anywhere, to something which is a complete triumph that almost no one else on earth could have accomplished. And it's kind of taking what we're given, our personality, our tendencies, and saying, what's a way that could lead me to God? And each of us kind of has almost a unique path.
Instead of destroy us.
To God, instead of destroy us, right? And because it can do both.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, and it's true in the point that you're speaking to. It's also what we see, the great saints and the great masters, they use those those tools that are unique to us. We each have our own dharma. And so, that's how Yogananda describes it, is that, we're all instruments for God, right? When we realize that, but I might be a hammer, you might be a screwdriver. And if a hammer goes in to do a screwdriver's job, it's not going to do a very good job, right? I'm just going to bang at something and break it. And so really that's what you're speaking to. We have these unique qualities, and we have to discover and find what works for us, what is right for us, and how to serve God. And it's true that whether he was sitting at the feet and kissing the feet of Neem Karoli Baba or not, if he's serving God and he's serving that representation of light and that divinity, then he can do good work. And so I like what you're saying, that he was able to transform those qualities. It is true, right? No, every circumstance is neutral, and in that even every quality in a sense is neutral. Can we use our qualities to lift us up toward God, or are they bringing us down? And the stories you're sharing, again, I'm revealing all of the secrets of the life of St. Francis, but it's very similar to Francis. This is the 1200s, but he was a playboy. He was, a rich merchant family. He was out throwing parties and, having all of his friends over and buying expensive things. And one day he just wakes up, and realizes that he wants to live a different life. And he goes through we'll share all of this, but, he goes through this whole process and has to turn away from his family as well. So we see these trends over and over again. And that really is, there is an archetype of the life of a saint, because it's not an archetype in the sense that it's actually truth. It's the soul's journey, the awakening, the recognition, the fight and the struggle to transform, and then the ultimate triumph. And that's what comes, and that's what Yogananda and all of the great saints tell us, each one of us. That's our path. That's our journey. And that's where, just to kind of bring us full circle back into what we're speaking to tonight, that's also the power of Hanuman. And this guy, I know, isn't he amazing? So this is the story. I'll tell you all the story. So we were in Rishikesh, so he's from Rishikesh, but he actually has a store online where you could buy him, because you'll hear at the end of the story. So we were in Rishikesh, and we went into this amazing store, and we're just kind of looking around, and I saw him and just completely fell in love with him. Yeah, you guys can see him if you want to. And so I bought him, and Shanti, it was her birthday while we were there, so Shanti got one too. And he had two brothers with him that looked very similar. And so one was Ganesha and one was Shiva. And so I also bought Ganesha, so while I was there. So I brought home Hanuman and Ganesha, and Shanti brought home a Hanuman. And as soon as I got home, actually, that night, the night of our India pilgrimage, I was just so caught up in India. We had just been sharing all of these stories, and we had this beautiful blessing that we did with everyone with sandalwood we'd brought back from Badrinath. And I went home and I realized, oh my God, Shiva's missing. And I wanted Shiva. And so I went online and spent about an hour or so, and very quickly found an Etsy store from the same people from the store we bought it in Rishikesh. It's not a little store. Rishikesh is now a pretty big city, and it's...
Over on that
It wasn't Lakshman Jula. We didn't actually go all the way to Lakshman Jula, so it was the other one, which I forget what it's called. But yeah, I can tell you. I have the name of the store later. I can tell anyone who wants to know. Email me if you want to know. So I got home that night and I realized that that Shiva wasn't here and I needed Shiva. So I went online and found the store and found him. And the whole time I'm thinking, Lakshmi, you don't come on. Like, you have two. How many do you need? And then I went in and I put it in my cart and it came out to, I kid you not, $108 and some odd cents. And for those of you that know, 108 is a very sacred number. So I thought, okay, Shiva wants to be here. So I purchased Shiva. And then I brought him home and 2 weeks later he came and I opened him up and I just said, oh my God, what have I done? I've brought Shiva into my house. So I did some, I talked to Shiva and welcomed him in and said, let's be gentle, with all of that. But I was just reading today and I didn't know this. Obviously we know that Ganesha is the son of Shiva. That's the story of why Ganesha has an elephant head. Shiva accidentally cuts his head off and he replaces it. So Ganesha was his son and he accidentally is beheaded and Shiva replaces it with an elephant head. If you heard Sai Ganesha's talk a few weeks ago, he was sharing a sweet exchange he had with our driver Lakshman about it. And so I knew Ganesha was Shiva's son, but I was reading today that Hanuman is actually also an incarnation, not an incarnation of Shiva, what's the word? An emanation of Shiva. And so he's also considered, even though he's directly the son of the wind god, Vayu, but he's considered to be the son of Shiva. And so I was looking at them. I have them on 3 shelves in a row. Shiva's at the top and then Ganesha. And Hanuman is there, and I realized, I just looked at Shiva and I said, that's why you're here. You needed to be with your sons, because here are his 2 sons, and so that's why Shiva is here. It was just so perfect, because I realized he wasn't here to destroy my, to boom, boom, boom in my life and dance through my life. A little bit's okay, but he just wanted to be with his sons. Yeah.
Great story.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really powerful story. Yeah, and this is a nice way to get in to read it as well, this book by Vanamali. But, just to kind of end where we began with the power of Hanuman and what Hanuman represents, I actually wanted to end just by reading something from this book in the introduction to it. And as we know, Hanuman is worshipped around the world as sort of there's a term in German, it's called Jedermann. It means every man, and it's just sort of the representation of not literally every man quantitatively, but the Jedermann, the every man. And that's what Hanuman represents, is sort of the every man, the epitome of discipleship. Arjuna represents one aspect of that discipleship, the steadfastness and the concentration. This is what I was thinking about. So Arjuna also represents every disciple, the every man disciple. But Hanuman's worshipped in this way as well. And I realized, whereas Arjuna is that willpower, right? That karma, that action aspect of it. Hanuman is the bhakti aspect of it. He's the devotional, the heart ripping open his heart and nothing is there but Rama. And what the power that he represents is that he had to, just like the saints, walk through this struggle. Just like each one of us, he is not born a god in the life, even though we don't have his origin story necessarily. His life is not one, he's not born a god. He actually becomes self-realized through this process, through his steadfast devotion and bhakti love for Rama, seeing nothing but Rama, wanting nothing but Rama, serving nothing but Rama. And that's why that representation is so powerful for us, because it is the journey along the way that each one of us is taking. And to an extent, Arjuna is that as well. He throws down his bow and says, I won't fight. But there's such an essential bhakti quality and connection to that. And so let me see if I can find... Yeah, this is where, yeah, I'll put him back up. That way everyone can see him. I know, he's beautiful. Yeah. I'll bring all 3 of them sometime. We'll do an altar. This is what I want to do, an altar with all of them sometime. So we'll just end today by reading these lines. It combines both Hanuman and Neem Karoli Baba, so it's a nice way to end, and it's a perfect thing for all of us to meditate on. Sri Hanuman is the greatest of all devotees of the Lord. He's the Jnani, one in complete knowledge. In the fullest sense of the word, he has merged with his Lord, Sri Rama, in his own being, and he sees the Lord in everything and everyone. His realization of truth does not end there, as Sri Krishna says, and when he sees me in all, and sees all in me, then I never leave him, and he never leaves me. And he, who in this oneness of love loves me in whatever he sees, wherever this man may live, in truth, he lives in me. In the Bhagavad Gita. This is the key to understanding Sri Hanuman. He serves Sri Rama in all beings by removing the obstacles to those beings realizing the truth in themselves. He sees that in fact, there are no other beings, only Rama, motivated by love born of truth that manifests as compassion for beings who believe themselves to be separate. He works tirelessly to remove their suffering. Another mystery of Sri Hanuman is revealed by Neem Karoli Baba in one of his great old devotees, Dada Mukherjee. A small party of devotees had, along with Maharaj Ji, climbed to the top of the Hanuman Dharna in Chanikut. They rested by the spring that comes out from the rock at the top of the hill. Maharaj Ji said, this is where Hanuman Ji came to calm himself and to cool himself after burning Lanka. In the story of Hanuman's life, he, in retaliation and revenge, he burns the city of Lanka. So this says this is where he comes to cool himself off after burning Lanka. Then, after a few seconds, Neem Karoli Baba says very softly, as if to himself, of course, Hanuman was always at peace. No matter what he was doing, burning Lanka, destroying the demons, singing Ram's name, or serving his devotees, Hanuman was never outside of Sri Rama's being. May the Lord be gracious to all. That's, I think, a beautiful way to end, because it really is the essence of it, that when we can live in that place that is untouchable, you know, we, just like these great saints who were performing all these miracles, and we'll hear more miracles next week with Ananda Moima, and more miracles the week after that with Teresa and St. John of the Cross. What we begin to realize is just what we were speaking to earlier, that we can make a mockery of the limitations that we perceive in our lives, because on the other side of that veil, or on the other side of that little plaid blanket, is infinity and is eternity. And whenever we look into and gaze into the lives of the saints, we get to remember that. So it's a great privilege for us to do. So thank you all, and thank you everyone online. And I'm here, and so happy to chat and even play the Hanuman Chalisa for anybody who wants to. But we're going to leave our live stream now. So.